So what we're going to do now, sorry, the jackhammer is back. We're going to talk about the Audient. This is going to be a basic overview of the Audient. We're going to go over some stuff here, and then we'll talk about a little bit more in the Zoom. And then once we're done with that, I'll leave you to be able to go off and work on whatever you need to work on. But for now, let's talk about this. So with the Audient, basically, when we're doing any kind of recording or live performance or something like that, you have two separate paths here when we're doing recordings. You've got the recorder path, which is your input path here going into the console. That's going to go into your recorder. And then you have another path called the monitor path, which comes out of your recorder and goes to your speakers. Now, the reason why we have two separate paths like this is so that we can listen to what we are actually recording. So if you're recording in your home studio just by yourself, it's not as big of a deal. I did recordings for years and years and years with no input and monitor path. I was just listening to everything on my input path, and it was fine. And if I had some kind of problem with something, I would just go and fix it real quick, because I was just doing one little recording in my studio right there. But let's say you're recording an orchestra and you have 80 microphones and you're recording everything super up close like they do for movies, and you have all these microphones going into a big giant console, and you have one cable for one of them that's broken going into your recording device. Well, let's say you go through and you record an hour's worth of music and it sounds great, it's amazing, but one or two of your cables on your microphones from your console going into the recording device are broken, and you don't know about that until after you listen back to the recording. That's not going to do. You can't just go back and record for another hour. People are going to perform differently, they don't have time, all these different things. So the reason why we have an input path and a monitor path is so that you can listen to the recording, to the actual sound that is being recorded, so you can make sure that everything sounds correct. You don't want to skip this step with groups of people. If it's just one person and you do some tests and stuff like that, fine. It's not the end of the world if you skip this step, but it's not advised either, because as soon as you hear like a crackle or a pop or some kind of thing, then you can figure out what it's coming from. But if you're only listening to the recording after you've already made the recording, you have to go back and do it all over again. So there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why this is super, super important. So here's our path. On the input side of things, we have the person singing right here, la 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 la. They're singing, and they've got their microphone. Their microphone is the source. Their voice is the source. So they've got the source as their voice, la 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 la. Right? That's their voice, and then their voice goes into the microphone. The microphone takes it and puts it into the cable that goes into the console. Now, this first mixing console is so we can listen to that input source. We can listen to it real quick and say, yeah, that's somebody singing. That's what it should sound like. It sounds like la 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 instead of right? That's not what we want unless you're like Trent Reznor with Nine Inch Nails. All right, so we've got that. That is our input path. And then what happens is that console sends the signal into your recorder, which in this case is probably a computer. These days, almost everything's recorded into a computer, into your DAW, Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, whatever, and you're recording it. Then that signal is going to get recorded. As it's recording, it plays it out into another mixing console, and that's what we can listen to on our speakers. So we can hear it in two different stages. We can hear it on the input stage, and we can hear it at the monitor stage. So the monitor stage and the input stage, we can hear both of them. And with the monitor stage, that's where you're listening to it. Your input stage is where you're listening to it to make sure that's what it should sound like. That's a trumpet, that's a vocal, that's a drum, whatever. And then the monitor path is where we're saying, oh, that recording sounds good. That's a good recording. So that's what the two parts are for. So the input path, one more time, feeds the signal into the recorder. And the monitor path is what we are listening to make sure there are no problems with the recorder. Now, what has happened is that these two mixing consoles here, the input path and the monitor path, are combined into one unit to save space. That is literally all it's for. The whole point of having a big giant monitor, a big giant mixing console, is so we don't have 5 different mixing consoles for different things. We don't need these 2 consoles. We have 1 console, and that's what it's for. Now, continuing talking about this here, the input path is the path from the source to the recorder, and the monitor path is the path from the recorder to the speakers. This is what we listen to. That's what's up. We listen to this part here. Okay. On a split channel console, this is what the Mackie 1604 was. It's what the O2R is as well. A split channel console has the input path and the monitor path on 2 separate channels. Most consumer boards fall into this category, or prosumer boards, if you will. Mixing consoles aren't really consumer things. None of them are really consumer necessarily. But most consumer level boards or prosumer boards are split channel consoles. It means that if you have 8 channels total, that means if you're using it as a recording console, you would have 4 channels of recording. So in this case here, we've got a vocal, guitar, bass, and a kazoo, because every good band needs a kazoo. And we'd have the input side over here split in half, where it's got the vocal, guitar, bass, and kazoo. And then we also have the monitor path, which is coming back from our computer, which is also the vocals, guitar, bass, and kazoo. When you're recording, you're only going to listen to channels 5, 6, 7, and 8, not channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to test with channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 just to make sure you're getting the right signal, and then you're going to go ahead and for the rest of the time you'll be listening to 5, 6, 7, and 8. Jordan, you are marked late. Yes. Should you not be marked late? I mean, you just wrote your name in just now. So I marked you a half hour late instead of an hour late. But please let me know if there's some reason why you should not be marked late. All right. So, what is up, Sean? All right. Inline console. The inline console is what the Audient is, and the Audient has the inline console has the input path and the monitor path on the same channel. Now again, this is just to save space. Our inline console, with a split channel console, I've got 8 channels here, and so it means I can have 4 channels of recording. With an inline console, I have 8 channels, but that means I can have 8 channels of recording because each channel has an input path and a monitor path directly on the one channel. So the way it's set up by default here is the input path is on the top faders here, the short faders on the Audient, and the monitor path is on the bottom row of faders, which are also the long faders. And again, when you're recording, you're only going to listen to your monitor path. That's the one you're going to really pay attention to. The whole point of having an inline console is to save space. You can have twice as many channels. So we're just kind of breaking the space down in different ways. So we have 2 consoles here on our input path and our monitor path, so we put those into one console to save space. But if that's just one console here, which is just a regular split channel console, it's saving space. You forgot to put your name down. Okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt right now, but don't forget to put your name down, please. All right? Please, please, please. Okay, so the input path and monitor path are on 2 separate channels. Sorry, I just, I'm going to give you the benefit right now, but like it's you guys' responsibility to not forget. Okay, like we live in a world where I can't see you come in, so please don't forget. All right, thanks. So the split channel console has everything across 8 channels here, and then the inline console here has things stacked on top of each other. So the whole point of having an inline console is to save space. You can have twice as many channels. All right, so let's get on to our recording equipment. These are the various pieces of recording gear that you're going to have in your studio. First of all, we've got the multi-track recorder, MTR. MTR is a generic term for all devices that can record multiple tracks at the same time. Okay, so anything that can record multiple tracks is going to be called the multi-track recorder. I know in a lot of people might think of the multi-track recorder as a tape machine, and that's what it was traditionally. But an MTR these days really means Pro Tools. And when we're talking about Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton Live or whatever can record multiple tracks, what we're going to do is we have to make sure we have all the pieces of gear for that as well, which includes our DAW, includes our audio interface, okay? So it's not just the DAW, it's also the audio interface. And we're going to come back and talk about that. That's going to become very, very important, that audio interface, a little bit later. To the point where we're going to be talking about like advice on how to choose the proper audio interface. It goes really, really deep. But let's go back to multi-track recorder. Multi-track recorder can be anything. So some studios only have DAWs. Most studios only have DAWs. Some studios have a tape machine still. It's going to be pretty rare that you're going to be in a studio that has a tape machine these days, just because they're expensive to upkeep. They do sound great, and it's really nice to be able to have them. But to be honest, they're pretty much more trouble than they're worth these days. You can get that similar type of sound with plugins now. Not exactly the same and not quite as easily, but the plugins that we have these days sound amazing. So, did you? Okay. So also just one word about you guys putting your names down real quick is that, remember, I always share my screen in the beginning, and so your responsibility is to keep checking my computer and when I'm sharing my screen to make sure I get your name down. I would say, just in the first 15 minutes of class, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but I always try to show my screen until like 9:45. I don't really start teaching until about 9:45-ish, and that is so that y'all can make sure I got you is here. Because in the beginning, there's a whole bunch of people putting their names up at me, and sometimes I miss a name because I'm a human being. So please make sure that you always keep track. That's why I share my monitor in the beginning. I've talked about this before, and most of y'all are pretty good. Andre, you're usually pretty good, but just keep in mind that the whole reason I do that is so you can check on me to make sure I'm getting everything correctly, okay? Because I'm focused on 5 different things, and you all know how it is. Like, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. Something is going to get missed. And unfortunately, that's the name. Also, if you put your name in before 9:30, I'm probably not even going to see it because the chat on Twitch doesn't show me anything until after I've turned it on. So just be aware of that. Okay, anyway, going back to this. So the DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. I usually just say DAW. I don't know if that's how everybody says it or what. I know that some people actually say it DAW. That to me is just way too many words. So DAW is. DAW can be Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, FL Studio, whatever can record multiple tracks and is digital. Digital Audio Workstation, and it usually includes sequencing and synthesizers and all that stuff. You need a computer to run your DAW, and you also need an audio interface. Obviously, the more powerful the computer, the more tracks you can run at the same time. But that's not the main bottleneck. The main bottleneck is your audio interface. How many channels you can record in really depends on how many channels you have on how many inputs you have on your audio interface. So that's what this part right here is talking about. The audio interface is the main constraint regarding how many tracks you can record simultaneously. All right, so other DAWs that we have is the Alesis digital audio tape, which is ADAT. That's an 8-channel recorder. It looks like a VHS cassette. It was popular from the 90s into the early 2000s. Before it was kind of a bridge between big multi-track tape recorders and computers. It was like before computers got really powerful, and but it was still digital. So basically, if you wanted to do recording like on the road, you can use an ADAT for that. And they might still do that actually, but I think most people just take computers with them these days. You had the ADAT cable. It's an 8-channel digital audio cable that's still used today. And that's really why we use the term ADAT most of the time these days. And then you also had multi-track tape machines. You had 24-track and 2-track tape machines. They're expensive upkeep, and tape is expensive. It's hard to get these days. I think only one company in the world still makes tape. It's pretty crazy. All right, so here's a little picture of the input path. And this picture here is Interesting. Also, I feel like I might be missing some chats here because I just looked at my screen and I saw on the recorder that Seb had put something in here. Hands like this. But I'm not sure what that was about, and I didn't see it in my chat group. My chat's doing something weird where it's coming in and out. So if something weird is happening, let's address it. And if I ignore you, I'm not trying to ignore you. I'm not. Something's weird is happening on my end, so maybe I'm not getting all the chats. So I apologize in advance. If it's anything really strange, please bring it to my attention in Zoom. Hopefully that won't be weird. All right. Moving right along, let's talk about this input path here. So the input path has a source, and the source is transmitted into the microphone. The source in this case is your voice. La 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 la, right? That's the source. The source is right here in my face, or my throat rather. La 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 la. I'm a horrible, horrible singer. I apologize in advance. But if I put my hands, my fingers right here on my throat, I can actually hear my voice. La 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 la. I can hear, I can feel it. All that's good stuff there. Okay. So now what happens is that comes up my throat, out my mouth, la, and that's transmitting. It's moving the airwaves. It's vibrating the airwaves back and forth. So that sound is traveling through the air, and it is going into a mic slash or a DI, depending on what the instrument is. In this case here, it is a microphone. I have this microphone right here. I don't use this microphone for my teaching because I don't really have the right microphone stand here. Also, I don't want to have it I know it sounds a little bit better, but it's just uncomfortable for me to keep talking into a microphone like that. So the microphone picks up the voice, and that has a cable, and you can see here's the cable. It's plugged into my microphone. That has a cable, and that cable is going into it's patched into the mic pre-input. Now, a mic pre-input can either be directly on the console, or it can be a separate device that is not that's somewhere else in your studio. If you have a mic preamp or something here, I'm just going to put this right here in the middle of the screen. Okay, there we go. So that mic preamp here is then assigned to a channel. Now, on the Audient, that assignment is made by whichever one you plug it into. It's not a button. It's not some kind of choice that you make somewhere else. It's like if I plug into the back on channel 1, that's going to be in channel 1. That's how it is assigned. The channel has a whole bunch of stuff on it. The channel on the Audient has an EQ. It's got panning and stuff like that. It's got a fader. If you are on the SSL, that channel also has a compressor on it as well. That is routed through the group out or direct out, which goes into the multi-track recorder, which is patched with a cable. Okay, so source transmits through the air into the microphone, and then that microphone is patched with a cable into the mic pre-input, which is assigned, and that's just a hardwire assignment on the Audient, into the channel. That channel is routed using the group out. I can push a button to route that channel into the multi-track recorder, which is another cable in there. All right. Well, I can see. Goodness. Wow. Yeah, sorry. I seem to be having some weird transmission problems on my end. Not sure what the problem is, but it might be, I don't know, maybe it's too hot. I don't know. Let's see if that does that again. That was weird. I don't know if it's been doing that, but the recording should be good, so you can watch the recording. We can also talk when we're in Zoom later. All right, so that's what's going on with our source transmits into the mic DI, which is patched into the mic pre-input, and that is assigned to the channel, and it's routed into the group out from the channel, and then that's patched by the multi-track recorder. And we're going to go into each one of these steps in detail, so we can talk about all the stuff in detail. Okay. Now, the monitor path starts and kind of goes in reverse. The monitor path has the multi-track recorder, which is patched with a cable into the line or tape in on the back of your console. That is assigned to the channel. Now, on the Audient, that's just assigned using whatever one you plug it into on the back is which channel it goes into. On the O2R, however, that's not the case. That's actually assigned using, you can change that. So I can go into input number 5, but I can actually have it come to channel number 3. That's a whole nother thing. We're not going to talk about that until 2 weeks from now. But that's how that works. Now, this channel can get routed into the left-right mix bus at this point, where you push a button to route that into the left-right mix bus. That left-right mix bus is assigned to some kind of an output, which is the control room out in this case, and that is then hardwired into the speakers. So it's a lot of steps here, and we're going to go over these steps in detail over the next couple of weeks. Don't worry, you're going to be getting a lot of this details about this input path and the monitor path. All right, but we're going to do it kind of one step at a time. So let's talk about the input path on our Audient here first of all. So the input path on the back of the Audient here has our XLR, quarter inch, and inserts, returns, these things here. So these numbers here correspond to the numbers over here. So on the back of the Audient, we have an XLR and a quarter inch input here. And these are both our inputs. The XLR is right here. This is for a microphone input. And this number 2 here is for our line input. So if I have a microphone, I'm just going to plug it directly into that microphone input there, the XLR. If I have a preamp that I already have set up somewhere, then I can plug the microphone into the preamp, and the preamp will go into the line input. The preamp changes the signal into a quarter inch and goes into the line input here. Then we have our insert, sends, and returns. We're going to come back and talk about those on a different day. On the monitor path side of things, for the back of our Audient, we have our tape in, which is the signal from our multi-track recorder. Then we have our inserts and sends, and then number 8 up here is our channel number. So here, on the tape and the line look exactly the same, but they're very different. And you can see here also the color of this one is a darker color. It's this dark gray, and the color on this one is this light white color. And that's going to come back. We're going to talk about that as we talk about the Audient. And that's something to kind of help you maneuver, navigate through the Audient itself. All right, so on the front of the Audient, and let me just pull up, do I have a, no, okay. Okay, on the front of the Audient, up at the top, we have long meter and we have a short meter. And the long meter, number 1 and 2, these meters here are just showing us the audio level. The default situation for number 1 is that it is the tape path, which is our monitor path, and the default setting for number 2 is the input path. Okay, so by default, if you don't touch anything, when you plug a microphone into the back of the Audient, where you're going to see the signal is on this little tiny meter right here. It's just 2 LEDs. That is pretty much useless for actually telling about how loud your signal is. So what you want to do is you want to switch those two, flip them so that your input path when you're recording is on this side over here on the long meter, and the monitor path is on the short meter. Because when you're recording stuff for that channel, you don't really need to see what the monitor path is in the beginning. You want to see what your input path is doing so you can see how loud your level is and stuff like that, how loud the signal is. So you want to flip those, and that's number 6 down here. Number 6 flips these two, and number 6, it's hard to read, but it says MTR. We can look right over here on the side here and see that it says MTR button. This MTR stands in this case not for multi-track recorder, it stands for meter. And I know that's confusing because I literally just 5 minutes ago told you that MTR stands for multi-track recorder. In everywhere else in the world, MTR stands for multi-track recorder, but on the Audient it stands for meter. I know it's confusing. I'm not happy about it, but that's how it is. Okay, it's not our fault. It's Audient's fault. Go talk to them. All right. But you push that button, and what that does is it flips between number 1 and number 2. So if I push the button down, what happens is my long meter is now showing me my input path, the recording. So that's really, really nice that we can see that there. Number 7 here engages the input path insert. Number 8 is our preamp gain knob, and number 9 flips the phase. These are over here, right here. You can see number 9 is a phase. Number 8 is our gain knob, so you turn that up to get, if you're running a microphone directly into the Audient. Number 9 is the phase. Number 10 is our phantom power. That's actually really, really important. We're going to use that for condenser microphones. And then number 11 is the low cut. So if you're recording stuff, you don't need that low cut in there. You can use number 11. All right, number 1 is the routing matrix. Now, the reason why I have these, I stopped writing here, is because actually in class, if you're taking notes right now, I want you to take the notes on here, because we're actually going to finish this up. Like, I want you to go through and do all this stuff for kind of your assignment here. So I'm going to leave these open here, and what I want you to do is I want you to take some notes with this so you can see, so you can like understand what's going on. But right now, let's just go through it. I'm just going to go through it here for you, and what I want you to do is I actually want you to consult the Audient Manual. And the Audient Manual is right here under Handouts. So here, check this out. This Audient Manual here is a PDF. And the PDF, if we go through, if I go through and why are you taking so long? Audient PDF. There we go. Okay. Not sure why it took so long. Oh, it was already downloaded it. So, all right. So the Audit Manual is here. You can go ahead and download that, and I can open this up and check this out. Everything in the PDF here is listed out in the manual. So basically, what we're looking at here is I just cut these out from the manual. That's how that works. So I took them out from the manual and put them in here. So for your homework tonight, or homework during the practical part, I want you to do this Audient channel strip exercise here, the worksheet. And what you're going to do with this is you're going to download this PDF, open it up on your computer or in your iPad or whatever, and it's designed so you can fill out the answers here. So I can put my name up here, Tony Grund, and I'll just go through and I'll say, okay, number 1 is the long fader, or long meter rather, and the function is default setting is shows the monitor path, and then switched shows the input path. Right? Now, I don't really expect you to just copy it from here because, yeah, technically it's a 20 segment meter and it's a 3 segment meter, but that doesn't really help explain anything. And I want you to go through and read it and put it in your own words. So don't just copy and paste from over here. I want you to actually write it in your own words. The long meter, the default shows the monitor path, and when you switch it, it shows the input path. And then number 2 is, that's our short meter. And it's basically just flipped. So you can just copy and paste this here. Well, actually, yeah. good luck. Maybe you can. It depends on what kind of editing. This is a pain to edit. So I'm just going to write it from scratch here, the default. Yeah. Sorry. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot I can do, but the recording should be better. Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why. Maybe the heat is affecting the Wi-Fi network here. Maybe I'll try to wire. I've got a really, really long cable I can run through the outside window here. Maybe. So let me see if I can fix that for tomorrow. But right now, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. So the default shows the input path, and the switched version shows the monitor path. All right, so we have that there like that, and then you go through and fill these out, the whole thing. Go through and fill this out. And if you do that, then you should get a good understanding of what the Audient is all about there. But we're going to talk about right in here, right now, in the notes, just going straight through the notes here. Okay, so that's why it's missing all the extra writing here. So if you want to take some notes, please do. If you want to just follow along and watch the video again later, you can do that as well, because apparently we're having like a weird connection issue today for some reason. I'm not sure. I mean, for all I know, the road work they're doing outside, might be something to do with the internet. So hopefully not. All right, so number 2 here is the shift button. So number 1 is our routing matrix. The routing matrix, what it does is it allows us to route the signal to different inputs on our recorder, on the multi-track recorder. So if I'm coming into channel 5 on the console, I can actually send the signal from channel 5 into channel number 12 on my Pro Tools. Now, the only reason why you do this is if you're already using all the inputs on Pro Tools already, and you need to have its own separate input. Chances are you do not need to do that very much. Hopefully, you don't need to worry about that too often. Okay, but that's how you would do it right here. And then the shift button allows you to get to channels 13 through 24. So this number 1 here is channels 1 through 12, and then you hit shift, and that goes to 13 through 24, the numbers on the bottom right here. Then you have number 3, which is the pan button. That's something you're going to look into later on. We're not going to worry about that. And then number 4 is the long fader button. Again, we're not going to worry too much about that right now, because that's like kind of that's a more advanced use here. But number 3 and 4, you can use those together, and we can come back to that. Number 5 here is your auxes. Now, the Audient has 6 aux channels on it. Those are divided up into 3 groups of 2. You got 1 and 2 paired together, 3 and 4 paired together, and 5 and 6 paired together. And each pair has a short fader button and a pre button and another like aux button. So, for example, 1 and 2, my flipped pair for 1 and 2 would be 7 and 8. Okay, so I can actually go. It has 6 physical buttons or physical knobs, but actually we have 12 auxes on the Audient, and you can only use 6 at a time, but actually that's plenty. So by default, these aux channels are on your monitor path by default, but we can flip it to be on the input path by pushing in the short fader button. And again, I know that's going to be pretty confusing, so we're going to come back and talk about it. I'm just showing it to you because it's right there. But this short fader button flips it so the signal is coming from the input path. Then we have pre, which is our pre aux pre button, which is what you're going to use for headphone mixes or monitor mixes, stuff like that. And then we have 7 and 8. So these aux send knobs here are for 1 and 2, but if I push the button, they become 7 and 8. Down here, down here we have number 9, and number 9 here is auxes A and B. and these are for what we call the fold-back mix. The Audient has the fold-back mix in it. These are dedicated headphone or like headphone mix or monitor mix auxes. Again, we're going to come back and talk about those later, but basically, if I have a group of musicians in a room and I have some of them want to hear the vocals louder and some of them want to hear the guitar louder, then I can set up a separate mix for those two different groups. And so these people over here can be happy with their vocals louder in their headphones, and these people over here can be happy with the guitar louder in the headphones. So it's two separate mixes for two different groups of people, and it's a dedicated section just for that. The Audient at SAE, I'm pretty sure the Audient's the only board that has that capability. I do not think the SSL has that capability. All right, if we're moving here, and let me just see if I can grab a picture of this thing. I thought I had one here, but let's see. I think on here there was a. This is going to open up my PowerPoint, which I never open up. Ugh. Okay, so yeah. So here's what our Audient looks like at school. Now this is actually specifically for, let's see if I can zoom in on this. No. This is specifically for the dual layer control, which we don't really ever talk about here, but this is what the Audient looks like. I just want to show this to you because I just realized that you probably haven't seen it. Okay, thanks for letting us know. All right, that you're taking off here. All right, so if I just make it a little bit bigger. I just want to show this to you because this is what the Audient at school actually looks like. So over here on the left-hand side, we have all the channels here, and then here in the middle, we have our this is what they call the dual layer control. This is for controlling Pro Tools and Logic. And then here is our master section right here, and over here on the right-hand side is the patch bay. So each channel, and I can't really zoom in on this unfortunately right now, but each channel has everything is set up the same. Up in the top here is where your faders are. Right here is where your input pod is. Over here is where all the buttons are. We just looked at the matrix, the routing matrix. That's right up here. It's really hard to see, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I can't get in closer to that. And then here we have our aux sends. We just talked about that. And the next part here is our EQs. And then here's our short fader, and then down here is our long fader and the pan knob and all that stuff. So that's what we're looking at over here on this side here. So each channel has all those different settings there, and what we're doing is we're just kind of going through these piece by piece by piece. All right, and they're very fuzzy for some reason. All right, so number one here, this is on our EQs. Now, first of all, each EQ section has an input part on it right here. So you can see there's two sections for my EQ, the high frequency, low frequency, and then I've got my mids here, and then each one has an input button. This input button basically is to turn on the EQ. Now, I say basically turn on the EQ because that's not exactly what it's doing. The EQ is on, but the EQ is not in the signal. So really, the signal is just going straight through. And when you push the in button, what happens is the EQ says boop, and it goes into the signal. So now the signal has the EQ in it. That's what the in button does. It inserts it into the signal. The reason why they do this is because if you don't want the EQ, then you don't want the EQ to color the sound. You don't want the sound to be colored at all by the EQ, and some EQs are very clean and other EQs are not very clean. So the in button basically puts the EQ into the signal, and now we can turn the knobs and affect the sound. So if you do not have this button number 1 and number 7, if you do not have that button pushed, then you're not going to have you're not going to hear the EQ at all. So that's the most important part right there. That's the most important button on your EQ. Whenever I have students who are like, Tony, I can't hear the signal. Well, the big problem is they can't hear the signal because they didn't push the in button. So that's a big problem there. All right. Now, let's skip number 2 for now. We're going to come back to number 2 and 8. We'll come back to those. This first part here is our high frequency, low frequency, and these are 2 shelves. These are EQ shelves. We're going to come back and talk about what that means, although we have talked about EQs already, so you should know a little bit about that. But number 4 here is the gain, and number 3 is the frequency selection. You have, it's so fuzzy. I'm going to actually find a better version of this for you to upload up to onto Canvas. Let's see what actually is on Canvas right now. Let's see. What does this show us? Is this one super fuzzy? Oh no, it's actually cleaner than the one I have downloaded here. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one because that's cleaner than the one I've got on my computer currently. Yeah, load you. Let's see. Oh, it's just not, oh, that's annoying. It's just not scaling properly on my computer. All right, okay, well anyway, all right. So this looks better. We can kind of see this. Okay, so this button here goes back and forth between 10 kilohertz and 18 kilohertz. So when it's up, it's 10 kilohertz. That's the default position. And when it's down, it's 18 kilohertz. And that's where it's putting that that shelf EQ at. And then the number 4 is our gain knob, if we're going to gain it or we're going to reduce it here. And then number 5 is for the low frequency shelf, and that's 50 hertz or 100 hertz. And we're going to, again, you got that gain knob there. So we have 2 choices for the low and the high shelves. On the mids, these are what we call fully parametric EQs. Fully parametric means that they actually can adjust the frequency, so it can be lower or higher. And then parametric is how wide it can be there. Fully parametric is how wide the notch is there. So if we want a wider curve, we're going to turn the knob to the right. It's going to make a wider curve, so it's affecting more frequencies. And if we want it to be a narrower curve to affect less frequencies, it's going to be turned to the left there. And then number 10 here is how much gain or reduction we're going to have for that frequency. Okay. So 9 chooses the frequency, and you can see here it says kilohertz, so it chooses the frequency. 10 chooses the width of the curve there, and that's 11. Number 10 is the gain, and number 11 chooses the width of how wide that frequency is, how many frequencies it entails. And number 12 is for the low mid, and that's the hertz, that's the frequency. Number 13 is the gain, and then number 14 is the width there. So that's what we've got going on for these EQs. And again, we're actually going to come back and talk about those in more detail. This is kind of just an introduction to everything. So please don't feel like I'm skipping things and I'm never going to come back. The way that this course is set up, and if you looked at the Canvas notes, you'll understand the way this module is set up this week is that we do an overview today and we come back and we talk about it in detail over the next couple days. So if there's some things that you're kind of concerned about, don't be. I got you. All right, so this one here, let's see here. Can I make it? Oh, yeah. Okay, that's a bit better. I just have to feel like I have to adjust my screen here. All right, so this is the short fader. The short fader is our input path. This is where the signal, when we're dealing with the input signal, this is where we're hearing it and where we're adjusting the level. So number 1 here just shows us if it's between our mic and our tape input path or the monitor path. And we can change that actually with number 2, but I don't really recommend doing that. Let's leave that alone. We're going to pretty much skip over number 2 there. Number 3 is the pan knob for the input path. Again, you don't need to mess with this very much. it's got a specific function, but that specific function doesn't really come up in your normal day-to-day use of this console. It's kind of like if you need to use the pan knob, then you're already advanced enough to understand why you're using the pan knob here. So for the most part, you're not going to use button number 2 or number 3 or even number 1. You're not really going to use those hardly ever. Number 4 you are going to use all the time because number 4 sends the signal to our mix output. So the mix output is where usually we hear from our monitor speakers. That's our mix output. And so when you're testing the signal, when the person's singing, you set up somebody in the room and you're like, sing, and they're like, la 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 la, and you're testing that out. Well, you're gonna hit that mix button so you can test that out, so you can see, so you can hear and make sure, yes, that sounds like they're singing. And number 5 is the level of the short fader. You're gonna put that at 0 and just forget about it. Don't change that. Leave it at 0 and then just leave it there. Don't touch it. If it's too loud, you're gonna adjust the gain knob on the preamp, not this one right here. It's like 98% of the time you're never going to touch it. You're going to leave it at 0 and just forget about it. That other 2% is there's specific reasons why you would do it, but they're pretty difficult. Number 6 and 7. 6 is the solo button and 7 is your cut button. Cut basically is the mute button. It just makes it so you can't hear it anymore. Okay, so that's what these buttons are all here for. All right, so this here is our long fader, and it's chopped up into 2 sections here just so I can fit it on the screen. But on the long fader, number 1 is the flip button. Again, that button is not something we're going to mess with. That's so we can flip the position of the long fader and the short fader. So it's really, if you're using the Audient for something other than just recording, it's a whole thing. Number 2 here is just to show us if we're going to the tape or the mic input section. Again, don't really worry about number 1 or number 2. Number 3, we are going to use this button all the time. Number 3 is to send the signal to our mix bus. That's so we can hear it through our speakers, so it can be recorded into a 2-track recording, so we can send it to our friends and they can be amazed at how amazing we are. Number 4 is our pan knob to pan left and right. That number 4 is always going to be the pan knob. It's not the same as our pan knob here. Number 3 here, we're not really going to use this pan knob very much. But number 4, we might use this one all the time because this is in our monitor path. This is where we're actually doing our mix. And this kind of goes back to that question we had in the beginning. The person said, do you mix in mono or stereo? And the answer is yes. But the output is always going to be stereo. So we want to have these mono signals be pan to the left or pan to the right or whatever. So that's what this number 4 is for. Number 5 is the solo button for that channel, and number 6 is the cut button, which again is the mute button. And then we move to our fader, our actual fader down here. And this one we're not going to leave at 0 and forget about it. Remember, I said for the short fader here, you're going to set it to 0 and forget about it. That is not the case with the long fader. The long fader here is where we are going to be listening to our signal and making it fit nice and pretty within the mix. The question is, can you record automation on the Audient? And the answer is no, you cannot. There is no automation. The faders do not move around on their own. You cannot record automation into the Audient. Most big consoles you cannot record automation into. There are a few that you can record automation, but having automation in the console really increases the price by a lot because it means that those faders are what we call motorized faders. And those motorized faders, every single fader has a motor in it that can move the fader around. The O2R does have motorized faders, and you can actually record automation into it, but we don't really do that anymore because most of the time automation is going to be done in the DAW. It used to be a really big deal that these things had motorized faders and automation capabilities. These days, not so much. For live shows, yes, you want to have the motorized faders because you want to be able to basically have presets. Not so much for automation, but more for presets when you're working with multiple bands throughout the night. But if you wanted to record automation into the O2R, you could do it. It is a possibility, but with the Audient, it's not a possibility. All right. So here is our studio section here. Now, the part of the board where we're talking about right now is this section over here. This is what we call the, can I zoom? I can zoom. Oh, nice. Okay. So this part of the board right here is what we call the master section. So this section here has a whole bunch of different things in it. And let me just see if I have that up here. Let's just see. Do I have it here? I don't have it here on this one here, but we do have it on a separate PDF on another day. Not today, but a different day. We do have this, like a close-up of all this stuff. But the section we're talking about right now is this little section right here. And again, I wish I could have y'all in the Audient and go over all this stuff with you in the Audient itself. And that's what I would normally be doing, but we have to make do with what we can. I am going to take this photo, however, and post it up online because I like it that this photo exists. I don't know where this photo is, but pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to see about exporting that image here a little bit later. So, what we're talking about right now is the studio section here. And the studio section is what is being fed into the studio. The studio section is for your musicians in the studio. It's not for you, it's for them. So everything in here is about something going into the studio. So the speakers over here is if your studio has speakers. So I'm just gonna, whoa. There we go. I'm just gonna zoom in on this. Wait, did I not? I did that wrong. Hold on a second. Let's get my little sidebar here. There we go. Okay. Oh, no. There we go. I hit the button. It did. So there we go. Okay. So now, sorry. I keep trying to do this the wrong way. There we go. All right. Cool. Okay. So the studio section here, what happens is we have the speaker part here and we have the fold back part. The speaker is if you have speakers in your studio room. Some bigger studios have speakers, most do not. So you're really not going to use this section over here very often. The fold back, however, is for your headphone mixes for your musicians. So you can change what they're listening to in the headphone. We're going to come back and talk about how to do that, but it's a whole thing. So we're not going to focus on it right now. The fold back section has a tape 1, 2, and control room. These buttons are saying what are we sending to fold back A. Most of the time you're going to send aux A and B here, or sometimes you might send the control room over. Probably not tape 1 or tape 2. So you're probably not going to push these tape 1 or tape 2 buttons. Again, these are little small routing matrices, and if you're not used to them, it can be a bit confusing at first, but we're going to be covering this so much over the next few weeks that it will get easier for you. And also, if you've been paying attention for Pro Tools and Ableton Live and routing, it's not the same, but it's similar enough that this shouldn't be a completely different language. It's just a different accent in the same language. Meaning, you already know a bunch about routing, and this is just learning which buttons to push to do that routing. I'm going to let that cop go by. All right. Okay. So over here is the level that we're sending to that signal, and then we have the solo button so we can solo it, or so we can listen to it on our end or something like that. So that's what's going on here, and the on button here is turning on our speakers here. If you want to turn them on, send the signal to the speakers. You don't have to if you don't want to, because you're probably not using it, especially at SAE. You're not really using that speaker section. All right, this part here is very, very important because this controls what we are listening to ourselves. So over here, this one says studio. This is what's being sent to your musicians. But here, this one here says control room. This is what we're listening to in our control room. So what we're going to do here is, first of all, we're going to select our source. The source is most of the time going to be our mix. So when I push a mix button on a particular channel, that's sending it to the mix. So I have to make sure that my mix button is also pressed in my source on the control room. If I'm not listening to the mix, if I'm listening to what's coming from my tape 1, tape 2, or tape 3, I would push one of these buttons. Only one of these buttons can be pressed at a time. Only one can be pressed at a time. Number 2, I have my speaker select. Here, these are my different speakers that I have. At SAE, we only have one pair of monitor speakers, but a lot of studios do have multiple pairs of monitors in the room. And I should finish that sentence. We only have one pair of monitors in each control room. So every control room has one pair of monitors for you to listen to. But if you go to a bigger studio, a bigger commercial studio, you're going to have multiple pairs of monitors in that studio because you want to reference on different speakers. Most home studios, small studios, only have one set of monitors, and the person's very used to those. But if you really want to be accurate, you want to have multiple monitors that you're listening on, so you can get what it sounds like on different sets of monitors. So here, you can actually have each one of these pressed. So here's our main set of monitors. Then we have Alt 1, Alt 2, and Alt 3. And we have levels for these right here. The main monitor speakers here do not have a knob above them because the knob is this one right here that says main monitors. So I press the main button, press the mix button, and now I can hear my monitor level from here. So I turn that up, and there we go. We can mute. Cut is mute. It's just going to mute the signal entirely. Dim, what that does is it turns it down so it's nice and quiet, so you can hear that it's still doing something, but we can have a conversation over the music. All right, number 5 is mono. If you want to test the mix in mono, you want to hear it mixed in mono, just to make sure that it sounds pretty good in mono. And there are reasons for that, and we did talk about, I think we talked about the basics of mixing one day. So a mono mix is you want to make sure that none of your sounds are phase canceling each other. So you listen to stuff in mono and kind of get the mix set nice, and then put it back into stereo. Eventually, you're always going to end up with a stereo mix, but sometimes mono is the way to go just for checking things out. You can also cut the left or cut the right signal here with number 6, left and right. Cut the left and right. That's basically muting the left side or muting the right side. Here we have the oscillator section. The oscillator section's for when you're setting up your room or you want to test different frequencies in the room. You don't really need to worry about that at SAE, or if you're in a studio that's already been established, you don't really need to worry about that oscillator section there. Down here, the solo section is important. The solo is when you push a solo button on any channel, it has a level, so your overall solo level of how loud that's going to be when you solo it out. But number 6 here is really interesting. This is solo in front, and essentially this lets us have a mix of our soloed instrument, but still have the other instruments in the background so we can hear them. So essentially, if I have it all the way on the left, so it says solo, that means it's only going to be our soloed signal. We're not going to hear anything else. If I have it all the way on the right with our mix, that is going to be our mix signal, so it's all the other instruments. We don't want that either. What you might want, it depends on what you're doing with stuff, but you may want to have it so it's kind of more on the left-hand side of things, but not all the way to the left, because maybe you want to hear that instrument, but you still want to hear the other instruments to hear how things kind of fit together. So this is like a mix knob here that can mix between our full signal and our soloed signal. Solo in place. Essentially, we want to have that for if we want to be recording. So if you hit that solo button, it'll still be recording all the signals out. And then AFL and PFL is after fader level and pre-fader leveling there. So you want to make sure you can have that pressed or not, depending on how you're soloing stuff. And that really has to do with if you're recording and then you're trying to solo something while you're recording, it changes how you're hearing stuff and whether it's going to still be recording or not. My advice is, if you're recording, don't start soloing a bunch of stuff. Not in the beginning. So I kind of like glossing over that a little bit right now. And the reason why is because I don't really want you to get used to that yet. That's for a more advanced usage. Number 18 is our compressor. Now, one thing to say about the compressor that's really important is that the compressor is on the master bus. It's the same as the bus compressor on the SSL. The bus compressor on the SSL is very, very famous, and it only affects the main output signal, and Audient made the same thing, although it's less famous. It doesn't sound nearly as good as the SSL's compressor. But basically it's a compressor. You've got a threshold, you've got a ratio, you've got your makeup gain, and then you get your attack and release. The in button here is going to make it so it's either in the signal or it's not in the signal. If the in button is turned off, you're not going to hear the compressor. If you push the in button in, then you start to hear the compressor. Most of the time you're going to leave this off. If you like it, like one of the things that people found was that the SSL compressor was really nice on drums and stuff like that. So people would use that SSL compressor all the time for drums, and they would bounce out the drums through the SSL bus compressor. And I guess you could use the same thing on the Audient compressor here. I don't really use it too much, but it is there, and there it is. It's not on an individual channel. That's the main important part about this compressor that you want to know that makes it different from other compressors, is that this is not for the other channels. You can't use patch bay to make it be for a specific channel or something like that. It's not. It's just on the bus, the main output bus. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and hide my sidebar here. And this section here is a few notes that I just want you to keep in mind when you are in the Audient room. And this is one of those situations where these notes are really, really useful to have in the studio with you. I highly recommend that you always take these notes in the studio with you. Okay? So, a couple things here. Make sure the console is ready. So before you start, always make sure the console is ready. First of all, in your control room section, you select the source, make sure it's set to mix. The speaker select, make sure that says main. Your level is down, make sure the level is all the way down. Cut, turn the cut off so it's not glowing. And then your master fader, make sure your master fader is set to the unity, which is all the way up. Your master fader, in case you're wondering, is this one right over here on the right. It's this little guy right here. This is your master fader. Put it up all the way and leave it up all the way. Don't change it for your mix. Do not adjust your mix with the master fader. So one more time, when you're in the Audient, the first things you do, here's the first steps you do. Make sure your control room source is mix. Make sure your speaker select is main. Make sure the level is all the way down. Do not turn it up yet. Make sure your cut is turned off so it's not muted, and make sure your master fader is turned all the way up. Doesn't matter what order you do these things. The order is not important. Just the fact that you do them is the important part. All right, so now here's like a little checklist for when you're doing your level settings. And we're not gonna spend a lot of time on this today just because you can read this yourself and ask me questions, which is what I prefer to do instead of me just reading through it. I'm gonna read through it real quick, but I'm gonna go fast. And you're probably gonna have some questions about things, and that's fine. I want you to ask questions, but I don't really want you to ask questions right now. I want you to ask questions a little bit later on, okay? So, Audient level settings. First of all, plug the mic into the cable and plug it into the wall, into your mic patch bay there. Turn on the phantom power if needed. If you need the phantom power, like for a condenser microphone, make sure you turn that on. Push the MTR button to flip those meter levels. So you want the long meter to be your input path. So number 4, as the musician is playing, turn up the mic pre-gain knob until you get a decent signal. So as the musician is playing, turn up that mic pre-gain until you get a decent signal. This is not going to be your final level. It's just going to be a good test for right now, just to make sure we're getting a good signal. Then number 5, on the short fader, push the mix button. Push that mix button and then turn up the control room level a little bit so we can get like 9 o'clock, not too much, just 9 o'clock, and then turn up the short fader until you can hear sound. Up until step number 7, you're not hearing any sound. And that's important to understand. You're not going to hear sound in the very beginning because you don't want to hear sound in the beginning. You want to have everything turned down so that when that person plugs in the microphone and they hit the button or do the thing or whatever, there's no pops, there's no sudden loud noises. That's really important, so you don't have any sudden loud noises. Okay? All right. Number 5, I'm going to back it up here real quick. Number 5, push the mix button. Number 6, turn up the control room level. And then number 7, turn up the short fader until you hear sound. Once you hear sound, then you're going to go back to you're going to go back to step number 4, and you're going to finalize that signal level so it's nice and hot. Then you're going to unpush the short fader mix button. So you're no longer hearing sound. Put the short fader to unity. Make sure that short fader is set to unity. And so whatever level you've got coming in on your long meter there, that's the level that's going to be sent to your multi-track recorder. So the short fader has to be set to unity. All right, now in Pro Tools, you're going to go over to Pro Tools, and in Pro Tools you're going to create a new session or a new session and a new mono track. You're going to create both of those, a new session and a new mono track. On that mono track, you're going to set the channel input number. It's going to be set to the same channel that the sound is coming through on the Audient. So again, we're not going to hear anything yet. We're just going to setting things up because we unpushed that mix button there. So if my microphone is going into channel 6, then I want my Pro Tools to say input number 6. We can change all this. That's what this text here in green is saying. The Audient Pro Tools setup can be super flexible, but we're going to focus on the easy setup stuff for now. The Audient can do a lot of things, but we don't need to do a lot of things with the Audient quite yet. Some teachers, they like to teach all the stuff the Audient can do. I don't like to do that. I want to keep it simple. I want to keep it simple for you. In the beginning, you don't need to do all the things. You need to understand that you can do all the things, but all those things is like too much. I want you to learn how to walk, and I want you to get comfortable walking, and then we can start running, right? So back on the Audient, what we're going to do is we're going to set the routing matrix number the same as the channel number. This is what we call 1-to-1. So if I'm coming into input number 6, my short fader says 6, my long fader says 6, then I want to push number 6 on the routing matrix. That's part number 1. And then input number 6 on Pro Tools is going to be 1-to-1. So 6, channel 6 on my routing Audient routing matrix, and then input number 6 on Pro Tools. Go back to Pro Tools and name the track. Make sure you name that track. You always want to name the track. Always, 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 always name the track. Step number 4, on the Pro Tools, push the track's input monitor button or the record arm button. Make sure you push that button. Now you should see signal on the Pro Tools track meter. If the person's still playing and you've had signal going on the Audient, then you should now see signal in Pro Tools. Push that track monitor, input monitor button, or the record arm button, and you'll see the signal coming through. Now we're into the monitor path. In the monitor path side of things, all that before was the input path. It's all the input path. Recording into Pro Tools. Now we're on the monitor path. And again, here I just want to go back to the very, very, very beginning, the very first page here. This first page here, the recording path, the input path, has the source, microphone, mixing console up to the DAW, into the DAW. You're getting it so you can record into the DAW. That's where we have just stopped, just now. The stopping point we just came to is now we're at the computer. Everything after this point is now on this side of things where it says monitor path. Okay, that's where we are right now. So let's go back all the way to the end. Okay. So the monitor path. Pro Tools, set the channel output number is the same as the input number. In this case, it is channel number 6. So our microphone is plugged into the patch bay, to the mic patch bay, the wall thing that says number 6. On the Audient, it says number 6. On the routing matrix, it says number 6. On Pro Tools input, it says number 6. The output says number 6 as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring us back into our Audient again on channel number 6. So what we have to do is we have to push that meter button again, the MTR button, this meter, that's going to switch it back. So now our long meter is going to show our monitor path, because when we're actually doing our monitoring, we want to see that long meter, make sure everything is good. That part, I should say, you don't have to do that part. You can do that part. If you want to keep it on the input path, just to make sure you're not clipping your input path, you could also do that as well. Step number 3 here on our monitor path is on the long fader, push the mix button, and then we're going to turn up that long fader until you're satisfied with the mix. Once you push that mix button on the short fader to turn it off, we're not going to hear any sound until we push this button on the long fader and then turn it up. You're going to see the sound. You're going to see the faders, the meters jumping around, but we're not going to hear anything. So that's what's going on there. Turn up that long fader until you're satisfied. Cool. All right. Things to remember. The short fader affects the recording level. The long fader does not affect the recording level. Don't press the mix button for the input path and monitor path at the same time. This will cause double monitoring. Hearing the signal from two locations simultaneously. That's double monitoring. Try to avoid sudden loud sounds. Don't press the mix button after turning up the fader. Always press the mix button first and then turn up the fader. More things to remember. Don't bring any food or drinks into your studios. Keep your drinks in the hall or keep them out of your studio. You can see here, I've got my drink in my studio, but this is a water bottle that goes upside down and doesn't spill water. No water. One drop came out, but whatever. I can drink the water and then nothing comes out. That's great. It's from Contigo. I don't know if you can read that. Is that backwards? That might be backwards. But Contigo makes this. It's the Auto Seal water bottle. If you want to know more information about it, you can ask me. This is what I use all the time. I love it. I keep it in my studio. I keep it in my bedroom. Keep it everywhere with me all the time. I liked it so much that I actually left one of them in Thailand when I was in Thailand. That's how much I like it. I like to donate them to 7-Elevens in Thailand. All right, when you're done with the Audient or the O2R or the SSL or whatever, make sure you zero out the board when you're finished. And then make sure you're always finishing your sessions 15 minutes early for cleanup. If you start at 10 a.m., arrive at 9:45 or 9:30. If you finish at 6 p.m., start your cleanup at 5:30 or 5:45 because you need to make sure that you have enough space, time to clean up before the next person comes in. All right, and that is that. Cool. So what we're going to do now, say goodbye to the recording. Bye, recording.